Welcome, everybody. We are here, March 15th, the Ides of March, as it were. Another Shakespeare. 15th of March, work session for, it's not a good thing. No, the Ides of March is not a good thing, usually. For the work session for the bi-state presentation for Parks and Rec plan. So I'll call this to order. Work session is in order. Okay. So who's presenting first?
We have Bryan from bi-state here that will be presenting just a kind of an update on what they have put together over the last 9 months or so. 8 months? No, six months. Yeah, I guess we started in September. So yeah, we've done some meetings with Parks and Rec Board. We did a community gathering meeting where we had maybe 10 or 12 people showed up and kind of got their inputs. And Bryan and his team have been working on this documentation for us. And tonight will just be an update for you guys. And then hopefully in the next 4 to 5 months, we might have a final copy and pass that on to you guys and have that placed in the City Hall for us to always look back on for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. So,
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, yeah, please do that. You may sit or you can sit or wherever you're most comfortable.
As Nick said, we've been working since about the end of September or so, once we get the documentation signed and all that. So I think our first meeting with the park board was September 30th, and that was the kickoff. But I have draft chapters of 2 chapters that we were able to work on before getting input. So we were able to do some work ahead of time. And is there a clicker or should I just tell you to?
Yeah, you'll just have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can go
You
forward.
ready for the next one?
Sure. I should introduce myself. My name is Bryan Schmid. I'm a principal planner with Bi-State Regional Commission. We have a service area of the 5-county area around the Quad Cities, including Musketeer County. We're a member-based organization, so municipalities and counties pay dues, and we provide certain services, such as grant writing is the big one that we provide one-on-one with member governments, but we also provide planning services and that type of thing. Most of my experience is in transportation planning, alternative transportation planning and trails planning especially. So that will come up in a little bit too, not to give too much away, but I've been at Bi-State for about 8 years. So this is my second recreation plan, parks and recreation plan that I've been through. And I've been working with trails the whole time. So that's my go-to just professionally. So the first meeting that we had with the park board, it was 2-pronged. I'll get into a little bit later, but I wanted to lay out the mission and the vision that came out of that meeting first. And the vision for the plan is to foster lifelong connections among West Liberty residents and visitors through exceptional parks and recreation programming. And we tried to tie in that this is for residents and visitors, that the parks don't just stop providing services to people within the municipal boundaries. And then the connections part of it, it's connections between residents and their community, their city, as well as to the natural areas around them as well. The mission is to provide outstanding, safe, and exceptionally maintained parks and recreation opportunities for residents and to attract future neighbors. And that was something that came out of it, that last part from the plan, that West Liberty is kind of a unique community among rural Iowa communities in that it's grown in the past 50 years, pretty steadily. And that was something that the park board wanted to bring forth and provide language for in the plan. Go on to the next slide. And so the plan has a number of focus areas: facilities, operation, maintenance, and safety, programming and experiences, management, marketing and outreach, and then national park standards and comparison. And NERPA, the acronym is National Recreation and Parks Association. So we are looking at the facilities, the existing facilities in the city, looking at the age, how they serve residents and visitors, and seeing if they are sufficient or if they should be improved in one way or another. Some of the facilities, such as the pool, that's the big one, and out of the scope for a recommendation of this plan anyway. I don't have experience in recommending water features or that type of thing. So that would be outside of the scope of this plan, unfortunately. We're looking at operations, maintenance, and facility and safety. So the utilization of the parks on a day-to-day basis. These are types of things that it's great when people don't see them, but if they are missing, that affects the user experience in a pretty negative way that sticks with people for quite some time. So looking at these specific items will hopefully improve the overall experience for users in the parks. And then programmings and experiences. Programming is so like youth sports, special activities, events, that type of thing. Then experiences are if you go on a trail and it's just a wonderful experience with natural areas, bird singing, that type of thing. The natural areas fold into it. But you can also have experiences, obviously, with events, youth sports, and that type of thing. The management of the department is going to be looked at as well. And then marketing outreach, they're pretty high level, looking at Facebook and the user interactions, that type of thing. Then finally, we'll look at the national park standards. And standards is kind of a loose term that they're getting away from, that it's not really prescriptive. They're not saying that cities should have 10 acres of parks per resident or anything like that. They look at medians nationwide and then the means. So cities of under 20,000 residents have this many parks on average, or this many acres of parkland, miles of trail, that type of thing. Then we have a demographic comparison with peer communities around the state. And that is in, I think, chapter 4 that I handed out. Next slide. And so the project timeline, we're just about halfway through. So in the fall, we started our data collection and the inventories. Then we reviewed the background of what is already here on the ground. And then the winter is when we really started the public input and the stakeholder input. I'll get into that in a little bit. And then the spring, we're writing the document currently, now that we've gotten the input from park board, the public, as well as the stakeholder interviews. And then our inventories, we just need to go back and double check to make sure we have everything in place and that everything's correct. In the summer, we should have a full draft available for review. We'll provide to the park board first for their eyes, and then to go out to the public and to you all for final review and approval if you so choose. And that should be by the end of September this year. So just to give you a little sampling of some of the maps that we've created, and I understand it's not the greatest looking at maps on a projector, but just to give you an idea, the map on the left is of Wapsie Park, and this is part of the inventory that we went park by park with Nick to identify baseball fields, soccer fields, that type of thing. And then we mapped the nature trail in the park as well. So we went through every park and tried to get as accurate as we could. And we are able to measure the acreage of each park as well. So Wapsie Park is 46 acres, 46 and 46 hundredths of an acre. So we're able to add up the acreage citywide.
Why 46 100ths and not like 12/24 or whatever that 12/25, whatever it is? I was just curious.
I'm sorry, say that
You
again.
said it's 46 and 46 hundredths of like 46.46.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just reading.
That's a fraction. Sorry.
I prefer decimals to fractions personally.
Okay.
What is 46 hundredths in fractions?
23/50.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. Yeah. All right. My wife's a math teacher. It just takes me a little bit longer. So yeah, on the right, we have a map titled Future Development Areas and Service Areas. So another aim of this plan is to try and get some consistency between, well, this one, the annexation study, the comprehensive plan, and the capital improvement plan, as well as a plan from, it was the Heritage Foundation, looking at trails and natural areas in the city too. So the map on the right, it's a little hard to see, but there are a couple different colors. The darker brown colors towards the bottom are radii coming from the neighborhood parks. So there's Friendship Park south of the tracks and Railroad Park just to the upper left of that on the north side of the tracks. And I think this map will be tweaked a little bit, but I had asked our mapping staff to try and show that railroad tracks are a barrier and that just a radius from a single point, as far as the crow flies, isn't really helpful if there's a barrier between. Having grown up by 3 sets of railroad tracks, they're pretty big barriers. I'm familiar. So that's why the circles sort of stop at the railroad tracks. But I would like to show that people are able to cross on the street level. So we'll have to try and figure that out in terms of measuring from that point across the tracks. This map also shows the just general proposed parcel layer that we received from the annexation, or that we created from the annexation study on the north side of town. And that obviously is just proposed and able to be manipulated. But we wanted to show that where those proposed houses would be in relation to the park system.
And that's all in red up at the top.
Yep. We also show proposed trails in a dashed line that we used from the Musketeer County Trails Plan. And those, generally speaking, that trails plan didn't really deal with municipal boundaries. The city of Musketeer was a little different because they had a proposed trail layer already, so we used that. But sort of to the southwest side of town, you can see the dashed line coming up, and that was the proposed Hoover Nature Trail. So we wanted to show that as part of a larger planning effort as well. And the tan color covering most of the northern half of the map are, they're the, I think, 2 or 5 mile radius from the larger community parks. So there's a distinction between neighborhood parks and community parks. Neighborhood parks are smaller, serve a smaller area, able to be walked to by the population that it serves. The community parks, larger, more amenities, that type of thing, draw from a larger area. So we wanted to show that the community parks cover almost all of the northern half of, or the northern portion of the city. but there's still that little portion outside in the proposed annexation areas. So that'll gives you a kind of a feel of some of the mapping that we're doing. And so now I'll go into the input that we've received. Next slide. So I've alluded to it a couple of times, but there are three methods of input we've received to date. So the park board meetings, we attended two. One we did, I'll talk about it in a second, but the park board meetings, we had a list of stakeholders that we had conversations with. We were able to call or email, depending on the preference of the person. And then we held the public input workshop as well last month. And then still to come, park board and the public review of the full draft in the next couple months or so. And some of the approaches, are you familiar with the SWOT analysis? Strengths, opportunities, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's what we conducted with the park board, as well as the visioning that we talked about in the second slide or so. The interviews, we've conducted about 10 of them, and we've compiled all the input from them. And then it's a lot of the same input that we received in the public open house, but it's worthwhile having a one-on-one conversation, having their views brought forth. And we've had focused discussions with the public workshop after the mapping exercise. We brought everybody together, talked about what they proposed and what they prioritized, and are able to draw some conclusions from that. Next slide. So the SWOT results, I'll go over next. So the SWOT analysis is strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats, like I mentioned. You want to build on your strengths. And strengths are internal to the city, so something that the city can affect. Opportunities, you want to invest in the opportunities, and they're external to the city, so something, an outside factor come to town, and the city would like to invest and take advantage of those opportunities. The weaknesses are things that the city can control that it would want to shore up. And then threats are simply to monitor, and they're external, that you can't control climate change, but you can monitor it and try to adapt as best you can. So I'll go over one by one what was talked about in the SWOT analysis. In the strengths portion, we broke down into three general areas that there were numerous comments, but we generalized into three items. So the first item was the physical condition and the maintenance of the parks, that staff does a good job maintaining parks on a day in, day out basis. And there seemed to be a strong momentum for park upgrades, like with Friendship Park, with the new playground. There's strong community support from the residents, high participation in programs and events. This was just before Halloween. Nick had mentioned the Halloween walk on the trail that hundreds, how many? 400, it's mind-boggling, really. That's an astounding number. So that's a huge strength. And then finally, the tourism aspect, that the park board recognized that it's not just the citizens of West Liberty, but people coming for baseball, softball tournaments, that type of thing, coming to use the pool and to use the trail. So the parks affect a much broader population than just the residents. So moving on to weaknesses. Something that was mentioned, again, these are generalizations. but the inadequate amenities, either support amenities, so meaning benches, trash cans, restrooms, water fountains, that type of thing. Those could be improved and expanded upon in a number of parks. And like I said, if you need any of those things and they're not there, you make a note of that mentally and it sticks with you. But when those things are there and they're working well, things just seem to work a lot smoother. And then aging infrastructure. So like almost every Midwest city, infrastructure is getting up there in years. And it requires constant maintenance and vigilance to, repave streets, trails, sidewalks, making sure surfaces are level, that tree roots aren't heaving the sidewalks or that type of thing.
Do you have a print off of this?
Of the SWOT analysis, I can send that to you. We have a summary of the
I'm just
meeting input.
curious as to, just so we have like the weaknesses, the strengths, so forth. I just didn't know if that was, it's not included in these. I didn't know, because they're specific to West Liberty, that we could get a print off.
Yeah, I can send those tomorrow morning. And I can send everything that we have to date. So the meeting reports that summarizes everything as well as verbatim what people have said, if that would appeal.
Okay, yeah, because these are more of a generalized, outline, and I think that's more specific to what we're doing. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So the chapters that I passed out were done mostly before and during the input. The input didn't make it into these drafts. So, and I should mention that these are just drafts. If you have comments, please feel free to let me know. Just making a note. So aging infrastructure requires constant maintenance, and some sidewalks keeping up with ADA. It's a priority for almost every community, but it takes a long time, and unfortunately not very cheap. So that's something that needs to be addressed. It's not specific just to West Liberty, but it's something that the city will need to address in the next few years or so. So opportunities, the expansion of park and recreation offerings. So I mentioned the potential annexation areas as one opportunity, but the youth sports, the expansion last summer has been a success so far. People input has indicated that they're pretty happy with it. Things that could improve over time are the getting used to the online application and signing up and registration, that type of thing. But they thought that would come with time. It just takes some getting used to. Opportunities in reinvestment. Community Park Pool, like I mentioned, is a huge asset to the area and will require a significant investment at some point. But when that happens, improvements could potentially be made to have the pool appeal to a larger group, a wider variety of people, ages, abilities, and then a reinvestment to improve support infrastructure like the trash cans, that type of thing. Restrooms were a big one, especially out in Dutton. That came up numerous times. An opportunity in the beautification of the parks, talking about a naturalized area. That was something that the Parks Department doesn't quite have exactly for more passive recreation. So nature observation, nature walks, there's the Wapsie Nature Trail, but the flooding along the creek is something that came up. So tying a beautification, naturalization of areas along the stream banks, for instance, that's an opportunity that can be seized. Moving on to threats, and this is something that the city can't, or the public perception is kind of a gray area, but for the geography of the railroad, that's something that the city can't particularly affect, but it's something that the city can try to adapt to or work around. I mentioned the flooding in the creeks, and then neighborhood connectivity was something that came up too, which folded into the railroad, but that also mentioned the creeks too. But the railroad, it doesn't separate the city, but it creates a fairly large barrier between it and decreases the connectivity across the tracks, as well as pollution, not just air pollution, but noise pollution. Even if their horns aren't sounding, you can feel them from a long, long way away. So that's something that just needs to be monitored. And I won't say that no city has ever had a good experience working with the railroad, but I haven't heard of a city having a good experience with the railroad. But that's just something to monitor. And then finally, public perception, crime and vandalism came up pretty frequently. And that could be a threat or it could be a weakness. It was that sort of gray area. But it's something to monitor and to address as that comes up. So moving on to summary of the stakeholder interviews.
That was one where you want back.
Yeah, this time. Thanks. I'll go over the questions we asked. It was about 10 questions with some bulleted points of general answers that came up. Things that are working well, staff hardworking. They are visible in the parks. They work morning, night. So that was something that is visible and seen that came up. The conditions of the current conditions of the parks, while they could be improved, we're seen very, very positively. The facilities that are existing are being used well. There aren't large things that just aren't being used and just left to age and rot or sit for vandals or something like that. The facilities that are aging are being upgraded in a good, responsive manner. And this was tied specifically to Friendship Park that was highly visible and still brand new. I don't think the sod was laid yet when they're talking to these people. And then other youth activities like the Halloween walk, the outdoor driving movies, that type of thing. Those have gone over very, very well. And the next question is what improvements are needed? And this we broke out into a couple subcategories. Within the parks, the areas around the parks. Sorry. So the areas around the parks, I mentioned ADA and sidewalks. One comment was that although the park itself was good, getting to the park was made difficult, largely because of sidewalks that were decades old or something like that. So shelters, they were mostly positive. Some opportunities were to upgrade and update some of the existing shelters to provide more enclosed shelters that could be able to be rented out or that type of thing. Summer camps were a strength, but they wanted to see more of them. And then a splash pad, specifically at Railroad Park came up, and it came up again in the public input session as well, the workshop. Then the idea of a multi-purpose building was brought up, potentially working with the school district. That was an idea that was floated. Then trail expansion. People like the trail, but they wanted to see it connect to more things, be extended, that type of thing. So moving on to programming, the outdoor movies are great. I think that was verbatim. Then new activities at summer camps, and then coaching classes for youth sports. So the idea was that getting more coaches would help expand the teams and that type of thing. And there's typically a shortage of coaches, and not mentioned, but shortage of referees too. That's I think nationwide, that nobody really wants to be a referee much anymore. So operations and maintenance, next slide. Address trash cans in parks every day, and that comes down to a timing issue. If staff have the time, if they're not drawn away from a tournament or something like that, they fill up fairly quickly, and when they're overflowing, they cause some issues with wildlife or just appearance. Same with picnic shelters. They just wanted to see the amenities cleaned more often. And tying back into the trails, having a place to park your bikes, either walk them up or just stand them, was something that could be addressed pretty easily, all things being considered. And then drinking fountains, porta potties, and then ADA restrooms. In most parks, understand that you can't have all of these in every park, but they should be addressed in the larger parks. But with the caveat of staffing, that they wanted to see more and more things, but they recognize that staff needs to be able to run and operate and clean and address the needs of those new amenities. And moving on to marketing, I mentioned earlier, the online sign up for youth sports was confusing at first, but the more they used it, the more they were able to get acquainted with it. I think like for any new software, they mentioned how Facebook is being utilized, and it was a great strength. And they asked how could they reach more people. So that's something that the department look at in terms of partnerships, that type of thing, with schools, and Friday folders were brought up and how information could be disseminated through those. So next slide. And then we asked what the three most important issues are. And the first one was money. It doesn't grow on trees, so have to make decisions somewhere. And then the next one was the space or the lack of usable land. Going back to the geography and how the creeks and the railroads sort of confine the areas a little bit. And then insufficient staffing levels was brought up, and support structures. The pool, I put an asterisk because that's the big one that'll have to be addressed. And then trails, both intra-park and then inter-park, connecting areas, connecting all the parks, connecting downtown, schools, branching out to the neighborhoods, and getting over the tracks would be one of the more difficult parts of that. The way railroads work is that if you want to add a crosswalk at a railroad crossing, they want you to close another crossing somewhere else. So it's a net zero crossing in their eyes. So some other cities in our region are going through that currently, and it's not a great process to go through. So what opportunities should Parks and Recreation Department pursue in either 5 years or 10 years? Again, updating the swimming pool. And they said either replace it or rehab it. There wasn't a consensus. The pool itself, it works, fine for needs, but it could be improved is what that was getting to. And then partnerships and grant pursuit. And that's where we potentially could come in. We do grant writing at bi-state for free of charge for member governments, which West Liberty is. So we will provide a list of potential grant opportunities that could help address some of the financial needs. And then we could partner in the future to write grants. And then a bike trail connecting major parks, a green belt around town. That's is a long-term proposition. Trails take a while to engineer, build, plan for, and they do take some time. So that is out a few years at least. So next question is, what role does Parks and Recreation play in the long-term growth and development of the community? And this was tried to be a bit more open-ended, but it's indicative of a desire to spruce things up around town, and it shows initiative and pride. Rendezvous Park in downtown is a good example of that. People have mentioned that it's very well kept up, and it's a good spot for people to relax and socialize. An aquatic center and/or indoor multi-purpose facility would show an addition. This would, again, out of the scope of this plan, but a multi-purpose facility like that would be a very significant investment and require a lot of partnerships with school district or any other number of agencies that might potentially use it. Parks and Recreation improves the quality of life and to attract new residents and to keep kids involved in the community. Having a good park and recreation network and system increases the quality of life for people looking to move here, as well as to just give kids things to do. And it creates connections between those kids with their community, with their coaches, and potentially between parents or sports. I think parents tend to have their own opinions about the way things go, but that's out of the scope of this plan. Next question is, what key issues should be investigated or discussed? The expansion into sports was one. And then trails, we can get into that pretty in depth. And then partnerships with schools, especially with their proposed facility, and funding as well to potentially fund a higher, a more expensive facility. Physical infrastructure, so streets and sidewalks leading up to facilities, and that includes parking lots. Something that came up was that Dutton, there aren't a whole lot of places to park, so people park along the street or on the shoulders and walk a little bit to get to their tournaments. So talked about staffing existing facilities and new ones, that if new facilities are built, they need to be maintained to a proper level. And then the indoor sporting facility again as well. Next slide. What is the image of West Liberty's Parks and Recreation in the community? Almost entirely positive. People have a very good view of what's going on currently. And then people can see the hard work day in, day out that staff puts in. And for the size of the community, that there are a lot of opportunities for residents to take part. It just takes the first step by the resident to seek out those opportunities. And something we talk about in marketing is how to make that first step easier. Next, how would you rate the quality of services and programs provided? It's good, overwhelmingly good. Youth sports going well. Other activities bring people together, like the Halloween walk. Upgrades and or expansions are needed in some locations. That was brought up, that although it's a very positive view, some upgrades can be improved. Then the expanded length of sports seasons. The thought was that some of them were short, too short for kids to learn it and decide whether or not they like it. So that's kind of where that comment was coming from. Okay, so moving on to the public input workshop. Was held almost exactly a month ago at the community center, and we had 12 participants, not including Nick, me, and my colleague. It included a mapping exercise and then the facilitated discussion. So just the summary of the two groups. Group one, we asked, well, for the mapping exercise, we asked them in the end to come up with 3 priorities. And then we took on some additional comments as well, but we really wanted them to focus on the 3 most important areas or items that they wanted to see addressed in the coming years. And one from group 1 was Kimberly Park, going back to the pool, but also restrooms and the support facilities there. And the expansion, the annexation, green spaces are a lot easier to build as the subdivision is being built out as opposed to retrofitting. That's a common comment. And it's just easier to build either parks, trails, and other infrastructure as it's going in. And then the third priority for group 1 was to expand the trail to Wapsie and Dutton parks. The creek is outside of city limits, but is a natural connection and could provide a good area to build a trail in the future. Some of their additional comments were parking. A dog park came up, and they mentioned that should be towards the outer, could be towards the outer edges of the town, not specific to a location, but that's the opposite of what a splash pad is for the next group. They wanted to see that in a central location, but we'll talk about that in a minute. They also wanted to see a splash pad, wanted to see renovations of existing shelters, like I mentioned, to increase the number of rentable indoor shelters. And then cold weather activities, ice skating, sledding. Not sure if the topography is there for a big sledding hill, but it's, cold weather is a fact of life and we all have to live with it, whether we like it or not. So we shouldn't shut ourselves in for 6 months a year. So getting people outside of their homes is something that they wanted to see from group 1. Group 2 wanted to prioritize an expansion of programming opportunities. Those were really positive that they talked about in that group for all the reasons we've mentioned before. They wanted to expand and improve trails in Wapsie for the nature trail, but also connections to it. And then a little bridge over the creek to connect both halves of the park. And then the citywide trail network as well. They wanted to get places on the trails and be able to park their bike, walk around, go to a restaurant or something once they get to their destination. Other comments from this group: restrooms at Kimberly could be improved. Automated security at parks came up in terms of bathrooms, automatic locks or something like that. Security cameras to try and keep an eye on vandalism. That type of thing is where they were going with that. The splash pad in the central location, I mentioned they wanted to be able to walk to a central location in the center of town, or at least close by to a lot of residents, so people didn't have to drive there. Then they said to explore locations for a potential dog park, and that one location that was brainstormed was in an area that is flooded regularly, or maybe not regularly, but fairly frequently. You just need an open field. But I have to look into whether that would be okay in terms of feces left behind in floodwaters. That's not great, but we'll look into that. So that's a summary of the input that we've gotten so far. If I wasn't sure if you wanted to do questions or how you wanted to handle it now for moving forward.
We definitely have time for questions, discussion.
And contact information is on the slide, or Nick has it. So I'm open, call or email if that comes up.
I want to thank you for your work on this, and Nick, thank you to you and your team. You're amazing and awesome, and we saw a lot of really cool strengths that I would totally agree with for a lot of these, so well done.
No campground?
That was not brought up.
I think we should have 4
Just need
splash
that
pads.
pickleball season, right? Pickleball courts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking almost splash pad kept coming up. I'm thinking, geez, we need one on about every park.
And I know they're Nick's favorite too.
I'd rather take a splash pad than a pool.
Mhm.
I'd easier to maintain.
Okay.
It's talked to Casey's. Nice corner.
I'm parking there.
No.
What about
As a-
like prairie restoration or anything like that? Have you something like that, like large scale?
Yeah, that's definitely something that can be done, and the REAP program, Resource Enhancement and Protection, through the IRDNR is tailor-made for that. So that's absolutely something that can happen. We wrote a grant for the city of Bettendorf to do a stream bank stabilization that restored prairies. So that was very highly rated when the grant was reviewed. So those are very competitive projects. And it's absolutely worthwhile. I think Wapsie would be a natural area for that. Yeah, that's absolutely something that could improve, expand the inventory of parks and because there isn't exactly anything like that yet.
What year was it? I think it was 15, 16. We spoke about, I went up to the reef and the erosion along Wapsie, especially after the flood that had happened, I think in 13 or 2. And that was one thing with the plant, the nutrients, they have several types of, we just hadn't swung back around to it to try to help erosion control and then create that natural habitat for like butterflies and certain types of birds and
Pollinators.
Yeah.
And if you can get water quality into it, that's.
Nick, have we started an effort to clean up the Wapsie Park from the edge damage?
Yeah, that's already, We didn't have a lot, we only had 2 trees fall there. We got lucky.
Long time ago, many years ago, I was working, or Ken Wright came before the city and had asked what their plans are at the entrance of town. Do you remember that? No, okay, well, I worked out with Ken with the Arts Council, and he wanted to do some sort of like gateway or art or something to represent kind of the entrance of the town. And I know that there's the brick wall that says West Liberty on Topsy. And we just, I don't think we have any other kind of gateway, do we, to town?
You got the one that's,
The community
you got the
center.
one by the
side,
community
Highway 6
center
has one too.
line, but
By Alphonse.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It's
Um,
a concrete.
yeah,
Squares.
or is that's community center too? Is the one
It's
that-
Between the community
in
center.
the
and
town
Alphonse.
already, you know, it's not, you know, when you drive to Tiffin or
Mhm.
Solon, it's right when you come in town, you're seeing the sign that says, you know, there are maybe accomplishments from their high school or, you know, things like that, and
Right.
it's big, and it sticks out, it's.
But at that time, I think he was willing to work with the city or work with the Arts Council in the city to come up with a plan to do that. Maybe that would be included in that entrance, that gateway on Highway 6.
Cause that's when the old metal signs were, right? And they had come down and I remember Ken had said something, cause they used to have the Rotarians and
Yeah, there
there
was
was several
I think the
different,
Lions, Rotarians and
Yeah.
Zinnias or something, but
I was thinking it was out by the Richardsons, wasn't there one there by Richardson's? It was
Oh,
Hyman and
on
Perry's.
70?
Yep, when you were coming in.
70,
yeah. Yep, that billboard thing.
And when that one came down, I remember shortly after that, that's when Ken had, yep,
so maybe we can revisit that at some point and plan to do something at the gateways in
I would love
town.
to update our signage and stuff that's came up, and if you go, you know, I use Iowa City example because they have really nice signs for every park that they have. You know, we can just copy anybody that we want, you know, tailor it to West Liberty, and this is what we gotta do, but we have to put the effort in and the priorities of those things, and I think with this starting for us, it's a good starting point, because we've never had one before. I think you got a lot of good input from the community as well, so. Yeah, I think you guys can see that we have some really nice things, but we also have things that need the work that needs to be done, and I will continue to bring up the pool because it gets thrown out there and then it just stops. And I know it's a big chunk of money at some point, but we have to have a plan. You don't want it to go away, you know, we want that option, because we don't want people to go to Iowa City to go to swimming or to, you know, Tilden or Tipton, wherever we want to try and keep them here. But we just have, well, I just call it a lap swim pool, it's all it is, you know, but now you got all these other fancy aquatic centers and things like that, you'll be able to hit, you know, toddlers where they can just zero entry and have basically like a little small splash pad within the pool. You know, climbing walls, basketball hoops, zip lines, different, you know,
Lazy rivers.
lazy rivers, different things like that, or, you know, there's a lot of options out there. And I mean, it's gonna cost quite a bit of money if we do it completely, you know.
when I look at the aerobics, I mean, that was just kind of a, hey, let's do water
Yeah,
aerobics,
it
and
is,
then
yeah.
it's like, what's a year without it? I mean, you just don't.
I thank Kelly Morrison for a lot of
Yeah.
stuff at our pool. We go to an indoor, outdoor pool, then we gotta find more staff, someone to manage that, you know, things like that, so. All good things, I think, in the future, so of course. So yeah, I thank Bryan for all of his work too, for what we've done so far.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, anything before I close work section? All right, work session is done.